Once upon a time, the god Eros was supposed to fly to Mount Olympus with a single arrow. But on the way, he got bored, so he shot two arrows. One was an arrow of desire, and he aimed that at the beautiful Titan goddess Daphne. Then he grabbed another arrow, the arrow of indifference, and he aimed that one at Apollo, the handsome god of music and light. And just like that, Eros changed their lives forever. Now, Apollo had never met a woman who didn't love him. In fact, if you were a woman and you didn't love Apollo, you were kind of a laughingstock among the other women. So when he first saw Daphne running through the forest, he immediately began to chase after her because he wanted to win her affection. Now, Daphne was terrified. She knew Apollo was attracted to her, and she did not want his love. For one thing, she wasn't ready to be with a man. And for another, she loved being free, and she didn't want to be tied down by having a boyfriend. So Daphne ran as fast as she could, but Apollo was a god, and he could run even faster. She could hear his heavy footsteps getting closer and closer behind her, and soon she would be trapped. So in a moment of desperation, she did something. She turned around, and when she saw how close Apollo was, she called out to her father. "Father, help me," she cried. "Save me from this monster who wants to hurt me." Now, her father was the river god Phineus, and he heard his daughter's cries. He looked over and saw the determined look on Apollo's face. And though Apollo was one of the Olympians, Phineus was not afraid of him. You see, Phineus was an old god. In fact, he was so old that nobody really knew how old he was, and he was very powerful. He had been around since the days of the Titans, and he had seen many, many generations come and go. So he was not intimidated by Apollo. "Why are you chasing my daughter?" Phineus asked, his voice booming like thunder. Apollo stopped in his tracks and turned around to face the river god. "I only want to court her," he said, "and I believe we would make a good match." "She does not want your love," Phineus said, shaking his head. "She is not ready for a man. Let her come to you when she is ready, but you must leave her alone for now." Apollo knew he couldn't argue with the old god, so he turned back to the forest and walked away. But then he heard Daphne crying again, and he couldn't help himself. He turned around and went back to her. And she was still begging her father for help. "Please save me," she cried. "This god won't stop pursuing me." And Phineus was furious. He didn't like the way Apollo was treating his daughter, so he decided to teach him a lesson. He reached down and grabbed a handful of water from the nearby river. Then he splashed it onto Daphne, and her skin immediately hardened into bark. Leaves sprouted from her arms and legs, and her hair became the branches of a tree. And though her body was now a tree, her mind was still human. So she could feel the pain of being trapped inside the tree. She could feel the sun on her leaves and the wind through her branches, and she could hear the birds singing in her hair. Now, Daphne had turned into a laurel tree, and she stood there watching Apollo approach. She knew he would try to touch her, so she waited for him. And when he finally reached out and touched her, he felt a jolt of electricity shoot through his arm. It was the same feeling he got when he first laid his hands on a lyre and made music. He felt inspired, and he knew this tree was special. He stepped back and looked at it, and he realized it was also beautiful. In fact, it was the most beautiful tree he had ever seen. Its leaves were a deep green, and its branches reached up to the sky like arms. And then he noticed that the tree looked familiar, and he realized it was Daphne. She had turned into this tree to escape him, but he had found her anyway. And though he could have kept chasing her or kept trying to touch her, he didn't. Instead, he left her alone and went back to his palace. Once he was there, he got a lyre and began to play. And as he played, he sang a song about Daphne and her impossible beauty. And the more he sang, the more he realized that he didn't want to win her love anymore. Instead, he wanted to honor her. He declared that she would be his sacred tree, and he vowed to never cut down a laurel tree in his life. And that is why, to this day, All laurel trees are sacred to Apollo. If you cut them down, you might as well be cutting down a god. Now, some versions of this myth say that Daphne didn't turn into a laurel tree, but instead she turned into a bay tree. And in those versions, Apollo was so overcome with grief that he fell to his knees and put his hands over his face and cried out, "Woe is me! How happy you would have made me! O goddess, if you had chosen me for your consort, if you had not dreaded my bed. But now I shall make you eternally mine by this right, that wherever you may be, your leaves shall be sacred and inviolable." And thus he made the bay tree sacred and gave it a place of honor in his worship. Now, there are a lot of different stories about why the laurel tree is sacred to Apollo, but they all have the same basic elements, and they all teach us the same lesson. It doesn't matter how strong or powerful you are. If you force yourself on someone, they will eventually find a way to get away from you. Think about Apollo. He was one of the most powerful gods in the Greek pantheon. He had defeated Python, the giant serpent guarding the Oracle of Delphi, and he was the god of music and poetry and light. He could do anything he wanted, but he couldn't keep Daphne from turning into a tree. He couldn't beat her father in a fight, and he couldn't win her love by force. And in the end, he had to let her go. Now, you might think that's a pretty weak lesson, but I don't think so. I think it's a very important lesson, and I think we need to hear it more often. We live in a world where people think that if they're strong enough or powerful enough, they can do whatever they want. They think they can take advantage of other people because they're bigger or smarter or more successful. But that's not the way the world works. You can't force yourself on someone. If you do, they will find a way to stop you. Daphne was only 17 years old, but she was strong enough and clever enough to turn herself into a tree to escape Apollo. And that teaches us that no matter how old or how inexperienced you are, if someone is trying to take advantage of you, you should fight back. Don't let anyone push you around. Don't let anyone force you to do anything you don't want to do. Stand up for yourself. Turn yourself into a tree if you have to. Of course, Daphne didn't actually turn into a tree. She was a goddess, and she could change her shape at will. But for us ordinary mortals, we can't turn ourselves into trees. But the lesson still applies. If someone is trying to take advantage of you, you should fight back. That is the lesson of the laurel tree. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that story. If you did, please stay tuned for more.